Welcome to a journey that stretches far beyond memory, into the mists of time. We begin not with cities or empires or kings, but with something quieter, with farmers, with stones, with the turning of seasons. We begin with Europe in the deep Neolithic age. It is the year 5000 before the Common Era. Imagine Europe, not as we know it today, with roads and lights, but as a patchwork of forests and rivers, wide meadows and wild animals. Wolves roamed the forests. Aurochs, enormous wild cattle, grazed in the grasslands. The skies were filled with birds, and through this landscape, small groups of humans moved, settling, sowing, harvesting, and building mysteries that remain unsolved even now. The story of Europe in this time is the story of farming. For thousands of years before, humans had lived as hunters and gatherers. But around 7000 BCE, farming had arrived from Anatolia, spreading slowly, village by village, into the Balkans, then across the continent. By 5000 BCE, in Central and Eastern Europe, people lived in small but organized farming communities. They planted wheat and barley. They kept goats and sheep. They wove cloth from flax. Life was not easy, but it was steady. The rhythm of the year was the rhythm of the harvest. Spring, sowing seeds. Summer, tending crops. Autumn, harvest. Winter, storing grain, repairing tools, and waiting for warmth to return. Close your eyes. Imagine the sound of wooden wheels creaking, the laughter of children running barefoot in a village of clay and timber houses, the smell of earth after rain. Among the most fascinating Neolithic societies was the Cucuteni Tripelia culture, stretching across what is now Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. From around 4800 BCE, they built enormous settlements, some with thousands of houses, so large they would not be matched in Europe until the rise of ancient Greece millennia later. Their homes were made of clay and wood, painted in bright colors, sometimes even decorated. And when a house was abandoned, it was burned, deliberately, perhaps ritually. Archaeologists have uncovered exquisite pottery from this culture. Swirling red and black designs, symbols of spirals, suns, and waves. They also carved small figurines, many in the shape of women. Scholars debate their meaning. Were they goddesses? Mothers? Symbols of fertility? Imagine standing at dawn in one of those great settlements. Clay homes stretching around you. Smoke rising gently from hearths. Dogs barking, people carrying baskets of grain. The sound of grinding stones, as women turned wheat into flour for bread. And somewhere, deep in the settlement, a small shrine, with figurines watching silently. Keepers of a world we no longer fully understand. But perhaps the greatest secrets of this age stand not in the East, but in the west of Europe. The great stone monuments. Stonehenge in England is the most famous, but it is only one of hundreds, even thousands, of megalithic sites scattered across Britain, Ireland, France, Spain, and beyond. Picture it. Around 3000 BCE, communities gathered to drag enormous stones, some weighing more than 20 tons, across miles of land. They raised them into circles, lined them with the paths of the sun and moon. At Stonehenge, the great trilithons stood aligned to the midsummer sunrise. At Newgrange, in Ireland, a vast passage tomb was built, so that, on the winter solstice, sunlight would pierce through a narrow corridor, illuminating the inner chamber in golden light. These were not merely graves. They were calendars, temples, bridges between earth and sky, and they required patience, collaboration, and vision. Close your eyes and imagine standing among the stones as the first rays of solstice light crested the horizon. 1,000 people gathered, silent, watching, waiting. The air cold, but the moment warm with meaning. For them, this was not just astronomy. It was life itself, the turning of seasons, the promise of survival. And yet, beyond the monuments, daily life was simple. Houses of wood, reed, and clay, small fields, stone tools, polished to a sheen, cooking over open fires, weaving baskets, carving bone needles. In some villages, dogs curled by the fire. Children played with small clay toys. Elders told stories of spirits in the rivers, gods in the forests, ancestors in the stars. Death was never far. Graves have been found with offerings, beads, tools, food, sometimes painted red with ochre, as if to give warmth in the afterlife. To us, these graves are silent, but to them, they were whispers of connection between the living and the dead, between now and forever. And so, Europe in this age was not a land of empires or kings. It was a land of farmers and builders, of rituals written in stone and clay. The secrets of their beliefs remain. Why were the monuments raised? What stories were told in the firelight? Why did they burn their homes? We may never fully know. But the stones remain. The figurines remain. The silent fields, now plowed by modern machines, once echoed with their footsteps. This was the foundation, the soil from which all later history would grow. Now, let us move forward into the Bronze Age, where trade, travel, and new mysteries awaited. Time passes. Centuries drift by like clouds across the sky. The year is now around 3000 before the Common Era. Europe is changing. Stone tools are giving way to something new, something bright, something stronger. A metal called bronze. It is the beginning of the Bronze Age. Bronze is not found in nature. It is a human creation, made by mixing copper with tin, a marriage of two metals. When copper alone was hammered into tools, it was soft, too soft to last long. But when blended with tin, fire transformed it. It became sharper, harder, more durable. The discovery was not a single moment. It was learned slowly, through generations. A spark of curiosity, an accident by the fire, a glimmer in the furnace. And once discovered, bronze became treasure. Bronze became power. But there was a mystery. Copper could be found in many places. The mountains of the Balkans, the islands of Cyprus, the hills of Spain. But tin was rare. In fact, there were only a few sources in all of Europe. Some in the far reaches of Britain, some in the distant mountains of Central Europe. And so, to make bronze, people had to trade. Imagine the long journeys, caravans winding through forests, boats gliding along rivers, sailing across seas, carrying lumps of copper and tin. This was the first great network of Europe, a web of exchange, not just of metals, but of ideas, of stories, of beliefs. Far to the south, on the island of Crete, a civilization rose from this new wealth, the Minoans. Their palaces were unlike anything seen before in Europe. The palace of Knossos spread like a labyrinth, with twisting corridors, painted walls, and storerooms filled with jars of olive oil and grain. The Minoans painted dolphins on their walls, lilies, and dancers leaping over bulls. They sailed across the Aegean Sea, trading pottery, wool, and precious bronze. To the outside world, they must have seemed like a dream, an island kingdom, blessed by the sea, ruled by kings whose names are lost. The myth of the labyrinth. The half-man, half-bull, called the Minotaur. Maybe only legend. But legends often carry whispers of truth. Perhaps deep in the palace, rituals of bulls and gods did take place. Perhaps the sound of horns and drums echoed through torchlit halls. And then, one day, the Minoans were gone. Some say it was an earthquake. Others, a volcanic eruption from the island of Thera. Or perhaps invaders came, and the island kingdom fell silent. But the memory lived on. In myths, in stories, in secrets whispered across generations. On the Greek mainland, a new people rose, the Mycenaeans. They built fortresses on hilltops, with walls so thick that later Greeks believed giants must have placed the stones. They carved masks of gold to cover the faces of their dead. They filled tombs with weapons, jewelry, and treasures. And they went to war. One war in particular echoes louder than all the rest. The war for Troy. Troy stood on the edge of Asia, guarding the sea passage between worlds. According to legend, Greek kings sailed there to rescue Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. For 10 years they fought beneath the high walls of the city, and when the war seemed endless, they built a wooden horse, left it at the gates, and the city of Troy fell. We do not know how much of the story is true, but in the late 19th century, archaeologists uncovered ruins at a place called Hisarlik in modern Turkey. There, they found layer upon layer of ancient cities. One of them, indeed, had been burned in fire. So perhaps the story is not all myth. Perhaps, in the dim Bronze Age, a war was fought that left such a scar. It became legend. Throughout Europe, the Bronze Age left treasures buried in the earth. Axes with smooth, polished heads, swords with sharp, gleaming blades, necklaces of amber, carried from the cold Baltic shores to warm Mediterranean markets, hordes of bronze objects buried in the ground, perhaps as offerings to the gods. In northern lands, great burial mounds were raised for chieftains. In Denmark and Ireland, sacred bogs swallowed offerings, wagons, cauldrons, ornaments, all left in the earth in silence, waiting to be found again thousands of years later. But even this age of bronze had an end. Around 1200 BCE, the great networks broke apart. Trade faltered. Palaces burned. Cities fell. Across the eastern Mediterranean, kingdoms that had stood for centuries crumbled. Egypt called their attackers the Sea Peoples. Mysterious raiders arriving by ship, sweeping across the lands. We do not know exactly who they were, or why they came. But we know that after them, nothing was the same. The Bronze Age world was gone. The Bronze Age was an age of brilliance and of shadows. It gave Europe new tools, new wealth, new connections. It gave myths that still live today. And it gave secrets we still do not fully understand. How did they move such heavy stones for their fortresses? How did they navigate the seas with only stars to guide them? Why did their world collapse so suddenly? These questions remain, like echoes in the dark. But the story continues. For out of the ashes of the Bronze Age rose a new era, the Iron Age. An age of warriors, tribes, druids, and new mysteries yet to be told. The Bronze Age had ended in fire. Across Europe and the Mediterranean, palaces lay in ruins. Trade routes were broken. For a time, the world seemed to step backward, into darkness. But from this quiet came a new discovery: iron. Unlike bronze, iron was not rare. Iron ore could be found in hills, in rivers, in many lands. But iron was stubborn, harder to smelt. It required hotter fires, stronger furnaces, greater skill. And yet, when mastered, it changed everything. Iron gave sharper blades. Iron gave stronger plows. Iron was the tool of a new age. And so, the Iron Age began. Imagine Europe in this time. Forest thick and dark, stretching across the land. Tribes living in villages of wood and thatch. Hills crowned with forts. Their ramparts of earth and timber rising above valleys. Daily life was simple, and yet rich. Fields of barley and oats, herds of cattle and sheep, craftsmen hammering iron blades by the fire, women weaving cloth in colors of red, blue, and green. Children played with small carvings, while elders told stories of gods and heroes around the hearth. The Iron Age was not a single culture, but many. Yet across much of Europe, a new people rose who would be remembered with mystery and awe: the Celts. The word Celt is a modern name used by Greeks and Romans to describe many tribes. But to themselves, they were not one people. They were countless tribes, spread from Ireland to Spain, from France to the Danube, from the Alps to Anatolia. And yet, they shared certain ways of life. Spiral art carved into stone and metal, iron swords, long and elegant, torques, golden necklaces worn by warriors and chiefs, and a deep reverence for nature, for rivers, for trees, for the cycles of the earth. The Celts left few written words. Most of their secrets were carried by memory, by the voices of the Druids. The Druids were priests, judges, teachers, keepers of knowledge. They did not write their wisdom in books. They taught by speaking, by remembering, by repeating across generations. To the Druids, the natural world was alive, sacred groves of oak and yew, rivers that carried offerings, stones that marked the passage of the sun. When the Romans later asked the Druids to reveal their knowledge, they refused. They said writing would weaken memory, and memory was sacred. And so, their wisdom is lost to us now. But we can imagine a circle of oaks, a fire burning at the center, robed figures chanting softly, calling on the gods of sky and earth. The Celts also left a strange, silent gift, bodies, preserved for millennia in the peat bogs of northern Europe. Men and women laid gently in the earth, their skin darkened by time, but still whole, hair still visible, fingernails intact. Even the expression on their faces frozen. Some had ropes around their necks, or wounds upon their flesh. Were they sacrifices to the gods? Criminals punished? Or kings offered to the land itself? We cannot say for sure. But to walk among them in museums today is to feel the breath of another world, as if the Iron Age had only just ended. Across Europe, Iron Age tribes built hill forts, great rings of earth and timber on high ground. Inside, wooden houses clustered together. Outside, fields spread in every direction. From these forts, warriors rode with iron swords and spears, their shields painted with swirling patterns, Some wore helmets shaped like animals. Others charged into battle bare-chested, painted in bright colors, shouting to the sky. To their enemies, they must have seemed terrifying. To themselves, they were part of a living world. Their courage bound to their gods, their ancestors, their tribe. Though often seen as isolated, the Celts were deeply connected to others. Amber from the north, wine from the Mediterranean, coins, glass, pottery, all passed through Celtic lands. They founded rich settlements like the city of Bibracte in Gaul. They minted their own coins with designs of horses, faces, and spirals. And they traded stories too. Myths of gods with hammers, thunderbolts, and rivers that flowed with life. For the Celts, the boundary between worlds was thin. At certain times of year, at Samhain, at Beltane, they believed the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. Fires were lit on hilltops. Offerings were cast into rivers. Food was left for spirits, for ancestors, for unseen guests. It was a world of cycles, of seasons, of life, of death, of rebirth. Nothing was truly lost. All things turned and returned. By 500 BCE, the Celts had spread far across Europe. Warriors rode east into the Balkans. Traders sailed to Britain and Ireland. Some even crossed into Anatolia, where a group called the Galatians made their home. But the world around them was changing. To the south, powerful neighbors were rising. The Greeks, with their cities and philosophers. And soon, the Romans, with their legions and laws. The Iron Age Celts lived in splendor and in danger. Their secrets whispered in groves, their treasures buried in earth, their stories carried only in voice. And though much has been lost, we can still feel their presence in the earth beneath our feet, in rivers that once received offerings, in stones carved with spirals, in the hush of a forest where perhaps once, long ago, druids spoke to the gods. The Iron Age was a time of strength, of ritual, of connection between human and nature. It was a world of warriors, but also of poets, of fierce battles, and of quiet prayers whispered into rivers. From the ashes of the Bronze Age, the Celts built a world filled with art, belief, and mystery, a world that would soon meet the rising powers of Greece, and then Rome. The story continues. The voices of the druids fade into the shadows, and now the stage turns southward, to the land of myths, of philosophers, of gods upon mountains. The world of Greece, the classical age. The Iron Age tribes of Europe lived in forests and valleys, in forts and fields. But far to the south, across the blue waters of the Aegean Sea, something new was stirring. From the shadows of the Bronze Age collapse, Greece was awakening. Here, stone cities began to rise again. Temples gleamed white in the sun. Poets began to sing. Philosophers began to question. And myths, older than memory, were given new voice. This is the world of Greece, the land of gods and heroes, the land where legend met history. Our first glimpse into this world comes through the voice of a poet, or perhaps many poets. His name was Homer. Around the 8th century BCE, the Iliad and the Odyssey were sung. Long poems telling of the Trojan War, of Achilles and Hector, of Odysseus wandering the seas. They were not written at first, but carried in memory, in song, sung by bards to the strum of a lyre, around fires, in halls, across generations. We do not know if Homer was one man, or many. We do not know how much of his story is history and how much is myth. But through his words, the Greek world found its voice. And even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the rhythm of the lines, spoken slowly, like waves against the shore. Sing, O muse, of the wrath of Achilles. From this age came the polis, the city-state. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. Each was a world of its own, with its own laws, its own gods, its own way of life. In Athens, democracy was born. Citizens gathered in the agora, the public square, to debate, to vote, to speak. Not all were citizens. Only free men could participate. But the idea that people could rule themselves was something new. In Sparta, life was different. A society of warriors, trained from youth, disciplined, severe. Spartan boys left home at 7 to begin their training. Spartan women were strong, too, keeping households while men fought abroad. Each polis was unique. And together, they created a mosaic of cultures, bound by language, by religion, by shared festivals and games. At the heart of Greek life were the gods. Zeus, ruler of the sky. Hera, queen of heaven. Poseidon of the sea. Athena of wisdom. Apollo of light. Artemis of the hunt. The Greeks saw their gods everywhere. In thunder, in waves, in the flight of birds, the rustle of leaves, the crack of fire. Temples rose in their honor, with tall columns reaching skyward. Statues of marble stood silent, eyes unblinking. Sacrifices of animals, libations of wine, prayers whispered in the night, all bound humans to gods, gods to humans. And sometimes, mortals and gods mingled in myth, giving rise to heroes, Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, men whose stories blurred the line between human and divine. Among the most mysterious places in Greece was Delphi. Here, on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, stood a temple to Apollo, and within it, the oracle, a woman, the Pythia, sat upon a tripod above a fissure in the earth. She inhaled vapors, entered a trance, and spoke words, often cryptic, often strange. Kings, generals, common people all came to her. Should we go to war? Should we plant our crops? Should we build this city? Her answers were riddles, open to many meanings. But all listened. For they believed Apollo spoke through her. Imagine climbing the sacred way at Delphi. Marble treasuries lining the path, filled with gifts from every city of Greece. The air heavy with incense. The oracle's voice rising, broken, mysterious, and a priest leaning close to turn her words into prophecy. Even today, the stones of Delphi remain, silent, but still carrying whispers of the god who once spoke there. Though the cities of Greece often quarreled, there were times when they stood together. One such time came in the early 5th century BCE, when Persia, the greatest empire the world had yet seen, sought to conquer them. At Marathon, a small Athenian army faced the Persians. Against the odds, the Greeks won. And from that field, a messenger is said to have run all the way to Athens, 26 miles, to announce the victory. His run gave us the word we still use today, the marathon. At Thermopylae, a few hundred Spartans held a narrow pass against a massive Persian force. They fought to the last man. Though they fell, their courage became legend. And at Salamis, Greek ships lured the Persian fleet into narrow straits and destroyed them. The wars left scars, But they also gave Greece confidence, a sense that small, free cities could stand against mighty empires. After the Persian Wars, Athens entered what we call the Golden Age. Temples of white marble rose upon the Acropolis, most famously the Parthenon, built for the goddess Athena. Inside, a statue of gold and ivory towered, gleaming in torchlight. Philosophers walked the streets, Socrates, questioning all, asking what it meant to live a good life. His students, Plato and Aristotle, carried his ideas forward, founding schools, writing works that still shape thought today. In the theaters, tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides played before crowds. Stories of kings, of gods, of fate, of human suffering. And comedies too, sharp, witty, laughing at politics and daily life. Athens was alive with thought, with art, with debate. It was not perfect. Slavery existed. Women had little voice. But the energy of the city still shines through the centuries, like a flame that refuses to fade. Yet pride brought conflict. Athens grew powerful, rich from trade and tribute. Sparta grew wary, fearing Athens' dominance. And so, in 431 BCE, the Great Peloponnesian War began. Athens against Sparta, brother against brother. For nearly 30 years, Greece was torn apart. Plague swept through Athens. Armies marched, ships clashed, cities fell. In the end, Sparta triumphed. But Greece was weakened, and new shadows loomed on the horizon. From the north, in the land of Macedon, came a young king. His name was Alexander. Taught by Aristotle, trained as a warrior, he inherited his father's throne. And at just 20 years old, he set out to conquer the world. He marched through Greece, uniting the cities. He crossed into Asia, defeating the Persians in battle after battle. He marched south into Egypt, where he was crowned pharaoh. He marched east into Persia, into Babylon, into lands the Greeks had never dreamed of. By the time he was 30, Alexander ruled an empire stretching from Greece to India. No one had done such a thing before. But his life was short. At 32, he died. Perhaps of illness, perhaps of poison. His empire shattered. But his name lived on. And his dream of a world united, of Greece and East blended together, would echo for centuries. The story of Greece is a story of brilliance and of fragility, of poets and philosophers, of gods and temples, of wars and empires. It gave us democracy, tragedy, philosophy, history. It gave us myths that still breathe in our imagination. It gave us questions that remain unanswered. And as the Greek world shone, another rose beside it. A city on the Tiber River. A city that would one day rule them all. Rome. But before Rome became an empire, it was a kingdom. A republic. A growing power, step by step, reaching across Italy, across seas. And so our journey now turns west, to the rise of Rome. Long ago, on the banks of the river Tiber, a legend was told. Two brothers, Romulus and Remus, born of a princess and a god of war, cast adrift in a basket, abandoned to the waters, but saved by a she-wolf, who nursed them until a shepherd took them in. When they grew, they sought to build a city. But in quarrel, Romulus killed Remus, and so the city was named Rome. Was it true? We do not know. But legend or not, the story mattered. It gave the Romans their origin, born of struggle, of blood, of destiny. And so, from myth, Rome began. According to Roman memory, the city was founded in 753 BCE. At first, it was ruled by kings. 7 in total, their names preserved in stories. There was Numa, who gave Rome its first laws, its first temples. Tullus, who waged war. Tarquin, who built great works, including the Cloaca Maxima, a vast sewer that still runs beneath the city today. But the last king, Tarquin the Proud, was said to be cruel. His downfall came when his son committed a terrible crime, and the people rose against him. They expelled the kings and vowed never again to be ruled by one man. And so, the Republic was born. The Roman Republic was unlike anything before it. Power was divided. 2 consuls, elected each year, shared leadership. A senate of elders advised, debated, controlled. Assemblies of citizens voted, passed laws, chose magistrates. It was not perfect. Not everyone had a voice. Women, slaves, foreigners were excluded. But within the framework, Rome built a system that lasted centuries. It was a world of balance, of ambition checked by rules, of rivalry contained by law, at least in theory. At first, Rome was small, a single city. But slowly, steadily, it spread across Italy. They fought their neighbors, the Latins, the Sabines, the Samnites. They clashed with the Etruscans to the north. And one by one, they conquered, absorbed, allied. Rome was clever in victory. It offered citizenship to some, alliance to others. Instead of destroying, it wove a network. Cities bound to Rome, yet still standing. And in time, all of Italy came under Roman sway. Among Rome's earliest rivals and greatest influences were the Etruscans, a mysterious people, their language still not fully understood. They built cities with arches and sewers. They read the future in the flight of birds, in the livers of sacrificed animals. They painted tombs with dancers, banquets, musicians. Much of Roman religion, its rituals, its priests, even its symbols, came from the Etruscans. Even the purple robes of Roman magistrates, the curved ivory chairs of power. These were Etruscan gifts. Though their cities eventually fell to Rome, their spirit lived on, hidden within Roman custom, like roots beneath the soil. Once Rome ruled Italy, its eyes turned outward, and across the sea lay Carthage. Carthage, in North Africa, was wealthy, powerful, with ships that ruled the waves. Rome and Carthage clashed in a series of wars called the Punic Wars. The first lasted more than 20 years. Rome, at last, built a navy and won. Carthage surrendered Sicily, Rome's first province beyond Italy. The Second Punic War brought a name still remembered: Hannibal. He led his army, with elephants, across the Alps into Italy. He crushed Rome at battles like Cannae, where tens of thousands fell. But Rome endured. Year after year it fought on, refusing to yield. And at last, the Roman general Scipio carried the war to Africa, defeating Hannibal near Carthage itself. The Third Punic War was shorter and darker. Rome besieged Carthage. When the city fell, it was burned, its people enslaved. And Carthage was no more. With Carthage gone, Rome now ruled the western Mediterranean. And soon, the East would follow. As Rome fought in the west, Alexander's old empire crumbled in the east. Kingdoms in Greece, Egypt, and Asia grew rich, but weak. Rome, step by step, moved in. At first as allies, protectors. Then as rulers. Greek art, philosophy, and science poured into Rome. Romans built temples in Greek style. They read Greek plays, studied Greek thought, admired Greek beauty. Rome conquered Greece. But in truth, Greece conquered Rome too, through culture, through spirit, through memory. But as Rome expanded, strains began to show. Wealth from conquest poured into the city, but it flowed unevenly. The rich grew richer, buying vast estates. The poor lost their land, crowded into Rome, begging for bread. Slaves, taken in war, flooded Italy, working the fields while citizens grew restless. Reformers rose, the Gracchus brothers, calling for land to be shared, for laws to help the poor. But they were killed. And violence entered Roman politics. Generals, too, began to challenge the state. Marius, who reformed the army. Sulla, who marched on Rome itself. Civil wars shook the Republic. The old balance was breaking. And then came Julius Caesar. Born in 100 BCE, he was ambitious, brilliant, charismatic, a skilled orator, a cunning politician, a daring general. He led his armies into Gaul, modern France, and conquered it. He crossed rivers, climbed mountains, defeated tribes again and again. His commentaries tell of these wars, in calm, clear words, though always to his advantage. But while he gained glory abroad, his enemies in Rome feared him. They ordered him to give up his command. Instead, in 49 BCE, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army. By doing so, he defied the Senate. He chose war. The die is cast, he said, and Rome plunged into civil conflict. Caesar triumphed. He pursued his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean, defeated him, and returned to Rome as master. He declared himself dictator, not for a year, as tradition held, but for life. And many feared that the Republic itself was ending. On the 15th of March, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, Caesar entered the Senate. There, a group of senators surrounded him. They struck him with daggers. He fell at the foot of Pompey's statue, the man who had conquered Gaul, who had marched across rivers and seas, who had risen higher than any Roman before him, was gone. His death did not restore the Republic. Instead, it brought more wars. And soon, Rome would be ruled not by senators, but by emperors. But that is another story. From a small village by the Tiber, Rome had grown into a vast power. It absorbed Etruscan kings, fought Carthaginian armies, conquered Greek kingdoms. It created a republic that lasted centuries, and a culture that still echoes today. But with Caesar's fall, one age ended, and another began. The republic was no more. The empire waited. And so, we pause here, at the turning of history. From 5000 BCE, through stone and bronze, through iron and myth, through Greece and Rome, we have traveled. We end now in 44 BCE, the moment when ancient Europe, as we think of it, gave way to the world of emperors, of legions, of empire. Our journey began in the deep shadows of prehistory, 5,000 years before the Common Era, across the forests, rivers, and coasts of Europe. People tilled the land, raised animals, built wooden houses, and buried their dead with care. From those beginnings, millennia unfolded. Stone circles rose on misty plains. Bronze was hammered into blades and ornaments. Iron was forged into stronger tools, sharper swords. Tribes became cultures. Cultures became peoples. Peoples became civilizations, and each left traces, fragments of pottery, carvings of gods, ruins of walls, faint whispers across time. Long before cities, long before writing, there was the soil. Early farmers cut forests, planted wheat, herded sheep and goats. They watched the sun, the moon, the stars, marking the seasons. At places like Stonehenge in Britain, or the Great Passage tombs of Ireland, they built monuments aligned with solstices, with sunrises, with shadows. These were not only tombs, they were calendars, temples, and memories all at once. We cannot know exactly what prayers they spoke, but we know they cared for time, for cycles, for life's fragile balance. The first steps toward civilization were taken not in marble halls, but in fields, in forests, in sacred stone circles beneath the sky. As centuries passed, bronze glittered across Europe. Axes and daggers, mirrors and jewelry traded from shore to shore. Sea routes opened. Tin from Britain, copper from the Alps, amber from the Baltic, all flowing into networks of exchange. Warriors were buried with swords, chiefs with treasures, women with fine ornaments. Boats carried families and goods across wide rivers, across seas. Myths grew, of sun gods riding chariots, of thunder deities hurling bolts across the sky. The Bronze Age was an age of beginnings, of warriors, of gods, of stories carried in song. It was the stage upon which Europe's first shared identity began to form. Then, iron. Stronger than bronze, easier to find, harder to master. Iron reshaped the land. Farmers plowed deeper. Warriors wielded sharper blades. Celtic tribes spread across forests and fields. They carved intricate designs, spirals and knots, flowing like rivers. They worshipped in sacred groves, in clearings where druids spoke. They feasted, fought, allied, and rivaled. In the north, in Scandinavia, long boats skimmed across fjords, even in this early age. In the east, steppe riders thundered across open plains. Europe was no longer only a land of villages. It was a tapestry of tribes, of shifting alliances, of cultures rising and falling. Far south, the Aegean world gave birth to something new. The polis, the city-state, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each unique, each proud. Here, the seeds of philosophy were planted. Socrates asked questions that still trouble us. Plato dreamed of ideals. Aristotle studied the natural world. Here, drama was born. On open-air stages, stories of gods and mortals, of tragedy and comedy, unfolded beneath the stars. Here, democracy flickered into being, imperfect, fragile, limited, but still, a vision of self-rule. And here, myths lived, of Zeus on Olympus, of Apollo at Delphi, of heroes who fought monsters and fate. The Greek world gave Europe its first vision of itself as something more. A stage for art, for thought, for politics, for beauty. On the banks of the Tiber, another city grew. At first a village, then a kingdom, then a republic. Rome was patient. Rome was practical. Rome learned from others, the Etruscans, the Greeks, the Carthaginians. It borrowed, adapted, reshaped, and then made all its own. Rome was also relentless. It conquered Italy, then the seas, then the lands beyond. Its legions built roads, forts, aqueducts. Its laws bound allies and subjects. Its senate debated and schemed. And through triumphs and wars, through victories and betrayals, one figure rose higher than all: Julius Caesar. With him, the Republic broke. And in his death, Rome stepped from one age to another, from Republic to Empire. When we look across these thousands of years, a rhythm appears. Peoples rise. They build. They trade. They fight. They pray. They shine for a time, like torches in the night. And then they fade, but their ashes become soil for the next. The farmers of the Neolithic gave way to the builders of stone circles. The bronze traders gave way to the iron warriors. The Greeks gave wisdom. The Romans gave order. Each left something lasting. Each passed something forward. And we, listening now, are their heirs. Through all the centuries, one thread is constant: the human desire to endure, to plant in spring and reap in autumn, to bury the dead with honor, to worship what cannot be seen, to fight for land, for pride, for hope, to tell stories of gods, of heroes, of ancestors. Whether in a small village by the Danube, or in the marble courts of Athens, or in the Senate of Rome, the same questions stirred. Who are we? Where do we come from? What will we leave behind? And so, our journey through ancient Europe, from 5000 BCE to 44 BCE, comes gently to its close. We have walked among stone circles at dawn. We have sailed with Bronze Age traders, marched with iron-wielding tribes. We have listened to oracles, to philosophers, to senators, to generals. We have seen empires rise, and we have watched them fall. And now, we return to stillness. The fields of Europe lie quiet. The ruins rest beneath stars. The voices fade, leaving only the whisper of wind, the echo of rivers, the quiet hum of the earth itself. Perhaps that is the truest secret of history. That beneath all change, all glory, all loss, the land endures, and the human spirit endures. Close your eyes, and let those ancient echoes guide you into rest. The journey is complete. The story sleeps, and so may you.